Shiur is dedicated in memory of Rachel Leah Bas Reb Chaim Tzvi. May her neshama have an aliyah. We're up to page 36 in the Mitzuda edition of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Siman Ches, chapter 8, Seif Beis, section 2. Says the Kitzur, V'asur la'lechala l'shtos. Prior to davening Shachris, prior to praying in the morning, one is not allowed to eat or drink, based on a reading of the pasuk, Lo shenemar, as the pasuk has, as the verse teaches, in the book of Vayikra, Lo sochlu al hadam, not to eat literally on the blood, or not to eat anything with blood. So of course the simple understanding is what the Torah here is prohibiting is eating blood from an animal. But on a secondary level, perhaps, the Gemara explains that Lo Sachlu al Hadam, our sages teach in the Talmud, is to be understood, Lo Sachlu, do not eat, Kodem Shetispalilu al Dimchem, prior to praying for your blood, as in prior to davening for your sustenance. Continues the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Anybody who eats and drinks and only afterwards prays Olava Kasuv Omer, of such an individual the pasuk is referring to, when it declares Ve'osi Hishlachta Acharei Gavecha, literally to be read, you have thrown me, you have cast me behind your back, behind your body, behind your back. But it can also be read, Al Tikre, don't read the pasuk as only referring to your back literally, but with just a slight change of punctuation, Al Tikre Gavecha Ela Ge'echa. If you substitute the Vav with an Aleph, so you have cast me aside as a result of your arrogance. That with your arrogance you have tended to your own physical needs prior to acknowledging the source of your sustenance. Whereas it were, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, La'achar shenizgo hazeh kibul alav malchus shamayim, that this individual, after she has shown how important and how distinguished they may be, that now they're going to come and daven and acknowledge me. You know what? You take care of yourself. You can do it your own. You don't need me. So it's based on this that the Rishonim explain, the early authorities explain, that the prohibition of eating and drinking before davening is rooted in arrogance. That by going ahead and tending to one's own physical needs prior to praying, prior to acknowledging the source of one's existence and one's sustenance, so this represents arrogance in the highest form. It's for this reason that we already find in early authorities that when the eating and drinking prior to davening is not rooted in arrogance. For example, one drinks water. So water is not a haughty drink. Even the most expensive mineral water might be an exception. But generally drinking water would not be construed as arrogance. Therefore, many of the Rishonim write, and this is the accepted ruling in the Shulchan Aruch, one is allowed to drink water before davening. Similarly, if one is very weak, if one isn't feeling well, and it's necessary to eat and drink in order to be able to have the stamina to daven with at least minimal kavana, with a little bit of concentration. So here too, the authorities rule that one is allowed to partake before davening. Under these circumstances, as we'll see in a few moments in the Kitzur, the poskim do recommend, the authorities do suggest, that at the very least one recites the Birkas HaShachar, one recites the Al Natilas Yadayim, the Asher Yatzar, the Birkas HaTorah, and the Birkas HaShachar, the Hanos and L'Sech Vivina, prior to eating anything really any more than water. But if one absolutely has to, so even though one has not yet davened Shemona Esrei, one has not begun the body of the daily Shachris service, so one would nonetheless be allowed to eat if the eating is in order to be able to sustain the individual for the duration of the davening. Of course, if a person is sick and has to take medicine, he can't take medicine on an empty stomach, and waiting a half hour or waiting more than a half hour would not be medically recommended. So then, of course, also one would be allowed to have whatever food is necessary prior to davening. But there is a fine line, as we don't say bottoms up. Just because a person began to eat, so it doesn't mean that you can eat whatever you want. To the extent where the Kesef Shulchan Aruch rules over here, va'afilu lishtos kafei al tei im sukar v'chalav aser, eating or drinking coffee or tea. Well, probably drinking, I would imagine. Drinking coffee or tea before davening, which may be permissible if a person has to do so. Many specifically are lenient, in particular with respect to coffee, in order to get a person going. The Sefer Pele Yoetz, in fact, writes that it's an obligation to drink coffee before davening. So that a person comes to davening awake, that's somewhat debatable. But certainly if one needs to, drinking coffee before davening, the majority of authorities do maintain is acceptable.